Hello my dear friends, you are on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 25th of January of 2023. Today we have some interesting updates, so let's start. First, let's take a look at the Russian sources map. As you can see, there are a lot of icons. There are some icons in Zaporizhzhia area. Now, let's say there are some icons on the west part of Zaporizhzhia area, some icons on the east part of Zaporizhzhia area. There are a lot of movements on the ground near Bakhmut, and as you can see, there are very heavy artillery duels in the area of Kupiansk-Liman front line. When talking about the front lines, as we discussed, these days the Russians split the entire combat line in 5 parts: Kherson front line, Zaporizhzhia front line, Donetsk front line, a very small or short Liman front line, and very short Kupiansk front line. If you ask me, I would join these 2 front lines, but for some reasons the Russians decided to split this territory not in 2 front lines. When talking about Donetsk front line, this is the biggest front line, and when talking, it's about the front lines. But also, if you are able to follow the report of Minister of Defense of Russian Federation, all their military forces are split into military groups, and as I understand, as I see, there are 4 military groups in this military special operation, and every single military group have their own front line and responsibility. When talking about Kupiansk front line, about this area, the Russians are saying that the military group by the name of West is responsible for this area, so it's West military group. When talking about Liman front line, it's Liman, it's the area from Stelimakhovka to the Seversky Donetsk, so this front line. And when talking about this area, the military group that's responsible for this territory has the name of Center. So the north one is West, the Kupiansk. Liman is the central military group. When talking about Donetsk area and this area from Seversk to, let's say, Marinka, this one, this front line, this military group has the name of South. And when talking about Zaporizhzhia area, about this front line, the military group has the name of East. So East, South, Central, and West. So this is the military groups that the Russians uses for offensive operation during the special military operation. First of all, let's discuss and start with the Zaporizhzhia area. There are a lot of interesting updates, and the most interesting part is that today the Russians published video from drones, let's say, of a town by the name of Kamenska, this one. And very interesting that the Russians still says that they established control over this town and so on. Some military experts are saying that the Russians haven't established any control in this town, but the only thing they did is that they managed to push the Ukrainians to step back from this town. But the most important thing, that the Russians are not hurried to take the Ukrainian positions. I don't know why. Maybe this situation is connected with satellites and maybe some kind of equipment that Ukrainians hide on this position for better artillery attack or something like this, because today, during the day, we receive another update from the governor, military, or let's say military authorities of Zaporizhzhia area. They reported that they spotted that Ukrainians managed to accumulate around 40,000 soldiers near Orekhov. So, let's be more precise, on Zaporizhzhia front line. And the Russians are saying that the Ukrainians are preparing for upcoming counteroffensive operation in this area. I believe that Ukrainians will try to win some time before the Western weapon arrives, but the thing is that something tells me that the Western countries decided to change their tactic about the supply and support of Ukrainians with the Western weapon, and more sources are saying that if the Western sources are saying that they're planning to support Ukraine with the Western weapon, in 9 cases of 10, this Western weapon is already on the territory of Ukraine. So maybe this a part number of these tanks and strikers and many other armored vehicles are already on the territory of Ukraine, and they're waiting just the time to show these vehicles for public, for people and so on. And so the Russians, as you remember, in the beginning of this week started offensive operation in the end of the last week, but now there are no talks about the situation. They're not attacking anymore. They're not taking and not entering the Ukrainians' position that Ukrainians left during that attack. And another update that Ukrainians deployed around 40,000 soldiers. And the thing is, as you can see, this is also very interesting, that the Ukrainians also are not attacking, and the Ukrainians are not even trying to return territories back that they lost. They not lost them, but the Russians, we can say, turned these towns into gray zone. These towns used to be under Ukrainian control, but now maybe 50 or 40% of these territories are in the gray zone, and the Ukrainians are not in a hurry to return back these territories. A very interesting situation. From one side, I see that this is a very smart decision that Ukrainians made, because they understand the risk of attack. They see that there is no critical situation to start counteroffensive operation. They have enough of manpower, and the thing that they expect is the armored vehicles and Western support. From the other side, the Russians also achieved a lot of experience in this offensive operation. First of all, they managed to connect and to establish real roads, real connection between parts, between groups, and so between brigades. We can say that was some kind of a very massive reco in combat. Now they understand everything, and the most important, they received a lot of information about the situation of Ukrainian forces in this area. And don't forget about the fact that a few days ago the Russians reported that 2 Ukrainian officers, or maybe Russian officers that were undercover, change their group, change their party, change their side, and join Russian army. I believe now the Russians managed to collect a lot of important information. They made a lot of interesting conclusions, and I believe that the next weeks we're going to see more updates on the territory of Zaporizhzhia area. A lot of interesting updates are coming from, let's say, East Zaporizhzhia front line, to be more precise, from the Vuhledar. As you can see, there are a lot of icons around Vuhledar itself. As you can see, there is one of the most important icon is this icon, saying that the Russians managed to cross the fields and they entered the residential area, or how the Russian call this area, dacha. They entered dachi, that located on the south east of Vuhledar, and the only thing that split the Russians between Vuhledar is the road located between these two residential areas. And when talking about Vuhledar, the situation in this town is very critical. I believe that the Russians are not planning to stop, and the most important, that today the Russian published video. There is an icon showing this situation. The Russian published video of strikes using the Russians flamethrower systems TOS-1A. And as you know, if you remember, if the Russians start using these flamethrower systems, that means that they're almost at the end of storm operation. If you remember, If you remember, when talking about, let's say, Peski, the Russians published video of attack of strike using the same flamethrower system in Peski, and in the next 48 hours the Russians established control over this area. The same situation was in Soledar. The Russians published video attack of those using those systems, and the next 24 hours or 48 hours Soledar was encircled and the Russian managed to make some penetration. Why I'm saying this? You need to understand one important thing about this flamethrower system. When we're talking about regular artillery or multiple rocket launch systems, the range or distance that the parties are able to use is starting from 20-30 kilometers and so on, when talking about different types of artillery systems. But when talking about this flamethrower system, you are able to use them just in distance, not in distance not bigger than 6 kilometers. So let's return back to the Western sources map and let's try to analyze where the Russians had their positions. So the Russians were attacking the north part of Vuhledar, and if we try to calculate 6 kilometers, so as you can see, the Russians were very close to these positions. And if the Russians were able to get so close to Vuhledar using this flamethrower system, that means that the south position of Vuhledar are no longer have any problem, are no longer a barrier, or are no longer have any danger for the Russians. That means that most of the corner or edge position of Ukrainian forces in Vuhledar are already suppressed, and the Ukrainians were forced to step back. And let's update this map according to information we have. So according to the information before the offensive operation, the Russians controlled just Pavlovka, controlled Nikolska, controlled Volodimirovka, Blagodatная, the town on the west by the name of Solotka. And during the yesterday offensive operation, the Russians established control over the south part of this residential area and over this north part, let's say, of Pavlovka. So this bank of the river was taken by the Russians during the previous day offensive operation. And today the Russians continue moving along this residential area to the north, and today the Russians established control over this part of residential area. And this is very important, because if the Russians did really establish control over this part, that means that they managed to cut the only line that support the Ukrainians in Vuhledar, this one. We know that this cross was under fire control, and if the Russians crossed the river Kashlagach, then they established not just the fire control, but also they established physical control over this road. And there is still one road left that Ukrainians are able to use, this one, and then using the local roads they can get Vuhledar inside. But this is not very, anyway, situation in Vuhledar is very critical. The Russians are not planning to give up, they're not planning to stop. They developed too far on the north, and now it's highly unlikely they will just make a decision to step back. They will have more losses, or furthermore they will have to lose all their soldiers in this area if they decided to stop. There is just only one way, way to forward, and and there is no way to step back and so on. So I believe and I expect that in a day or in two or in three, the Russians will take Vuhledar and will establish 100% control over this town. When talking about the Ukrainians, they managed to make some kind of regrouping in this area, and these days, maybe these minutes, they're moving more and more reserves of 72nd Mechanized Brigade. Let's return back to the deployment map. As you can see, when talking about this area, there is a 72nd Mechanized Brigade, there is 68th Jaeger Brigade. So all these forces now, the Ukrainians doing one thing, they're moving as much as possible in this area. As you know, the situation in this area is very critical, because a lot of parts of these brigades were involved in defense of Marinka, and now we understand that all these reserves are not endless from the Ukrainian side, and of course now they have lack of manpower in Marinka. Now they have problems in Vuhledar, and to tell the truth, I believe that all this small part of Frontline will be collapsed in a day or in two and three. Anyway, we'll see. And we'll see what is going to be next. And when talking about Donetsk area, with the Zaporizhzhia area, my bad, the Ukrainian lost around 60 soldiers, something around 6 armored vehicles and 1 artillery system D-20 howitzer. Now let's move to the north. When talking about Peski front line, there are no updates. I believe that there are very heavy clashes. The Russians continue their offensive operation in Peromaiska. They try to complete their mission, and as we discussed yesterday, to get as fast as possible to this cross and to cut this road. And they want to cut Nivolska from supplying. With this operation, they will be able to activate their movements in direction of these towns. But for now, no changes. By saying that there are no changes, I mean that there are no updates from the front line, like video or audio confirmation and so on. I believe that there are very heavy clashes. The Russians are pushing, they're attacking, but we don't have just information about all these pushes. But I believe that maybe even today we're going to receive something by the end of this day. When talking about Donetsk front line, the Ukrainian lost around 60 soldiers, 3 armored vehicles, 1 artillery system, Stab B, and another something around 2 ammo depot in this area. And now we are moving to Bakhmut. Today, the Western country, more and more military experts, Western authority experts, Western military representatives are saying that it is very necessary to make this very difficult decision, but to leave Bakhmut, because the Russians pushes from the south, from Klishchevka in direction of Ivanovska. There are very heavy clashes in the small agglomeration on the north, in the town between Blagodatnaya, Paraskovyevka, Krasnaya Gora, Verkhovka, Yagidnaya. These towns, furthermore, as you can see, there is another icon, another update in this area, and we can say that a small village, or the part of this village that left from Krasnaya Gora, is encircled or appeared in operational or even in tactical encirclement. The Russian pushes from the north, and when talking about the area and vicinity of Podgorodnya, the Russians managed to enter Paraskovyevka from the south. So not every single street or every single building in Paraskovyevka under Russian control, but the south part, this one that located on the north from Podgorodnya. Now, this part is already in the Russian controls. The Russians attack from the north, from the south, and there is just one road, I believe, or maybe 2 roads that Ukrainians are able to use to cross this railroad. When talking about infantry, they can cross this railroad anywhere they want, but when talking about armored vehicles, I'm not sure that it is very easy to cross a lot of railroad lines and not to damage the vehicles. So but for now, I believe it's also not a problem for the Ukrainians. But anyway, I believe that maybe the next days this town is going to fall. When talking about Vuhledar, the Russians, as you can see, this map has been updated, and the Russians control the north part, and they're moving to the south, pushing the Ukrainians also from the north in direction and trying to force them to step back in direction of Paraskovyevka. Not much, the Ukrainians don't have not much time left before the entire north agglomeration is going to fall, and after that we're going to talk about a tactical encirclement of Bakhmut, and from that moment the Ukrainians will have a lot of problems to evacuate from this town. But more and more military experts and Ukrainian Western experts are saying that sooner or later, maybe in a week or maybe but less than in 2 weeks, the Ukrainians will take a decision and they will leave Bakhmut. I believe that now they're just searching for a solution on how to do this and not to lose their reputation or not to damage their reputation. For now, I'm not sure, but anyway, they will find the correct words, correct pictures, videos, and but they will move from Bakhmut. Maybe these days they're just trying to complete the defense line around Chasov Yar and so on, but I believe if the Ukrainians are moving from Bakhmut, they will be forced to move from Chasov Yar as well, by the way, automatically. There are a lot of ways, a lot of solutions how to protect Bakhmut, Chasov Yar. As you can see, there is a railroad from the north, there is a N32 road from the south, there is a river canal in this area. So Chasov Yar is protected at least from 3 sides, as you can see, from the north, from the east and from the south. And when talking about Chasov Yar, it's also a very powerful fortification, and there are a lot of natural barriers that protect this town from the Russians. But anyway, it's also just a question of time, because if Ukrainians stepping back from Bakhmut, the Russians will receive some kind of operational square from the north, and they will be able to do a lot of beautiful things on the north, and they will be able to attack Chasov Yar at least from 3 sides easily. Of course, the Ukrainians will be forced, and they will have to stand there for a few months, maybe for a few weeks, just to slow down the Russians, but maybe this time is enough to receive Western weapon and to organize their own counter-offensive operation. Anyway, we'll see. Now we're moving to the Seversk front line. There are no changes in this area. The Russians are pushing from the south, from Krasnopolovka in direction of Mykolaiv, Karasdolovka, but without changes. The only interesting update that Ukraine lost on Seversk bridgehead another M777 artillery system. And when talking about Liman, there was a very heavy artillery duels during the previous 24 hours, and the Ukrainian lost at least 4 Panzer Howitzer 2000. It's German Panzer Howitzer, I believe so. They lost 2 Krab howitzers, Polish one Amsta S howitzer, it's all Soviet, and 1 Gvozdika howitzer, another Soviet artillery system. So up to 8 artillery systems were destroyed during the previous 24 hours on Liman front line. But when talking about the manpower, the Ukraine lost just 20 soldiers on that front line and 2 armored vehicles. And mainly the Russians were attacking the same brigade 95th and 125 that are deployed on the line from Yampolovka, the Serebryanka forest, and so on. When talking about Kupiansk front line, the Ukrainians lost 2 German Panzer Howitzer 2000 in the area of Kupiansk. And when talking about manpower, the Ukraine lost around 90 soldiers, 3 armored vehicles, and 2 artillery systems. Furthermore, the Russians are saying that during the previous 24 hours they managed to destroy 7 commandos group in this area. And when talking about Kupiansk, the Ukrainians are moving more and more reinforcements to this area, and some sources are saying that during the previous 24 hours the Ukrainians deployed up to 30 armored vehicles in this area. So as we discussed, there might be just 2 options: or the Ukrainians are planning to increase the pressure in direction of Kuzyomovka, because as you can see, according to this map, the Russian source map has been updated a little bit. Ukrainians completely returned control over Novoselovska, and some sources are saying that maybe the Russians, maybe this part is already in the gray zone, but not even in the Russian control. The Russians were forced to step back from Kuzyomovka. They couldn't hold under the pressure of Ukrainians in this area, and maybe the Ukrainians, as soon as they establish, I don't know if we can call this like something like stable bridgehead in this area, the Ukrainians deployed armored vehicles in this area, and now they're planning to continue their offensive operation from Kuzyomovka in direction of Svatova. Maybe that was exactly what Ukrainians were waiting for and were fighting for this small bridgehead in Kuzyomovka to continue their attack in direction of Svatova. Anything might happen. The only thing I know is that Western countries ask Ukrainians not to start any offensive operation during the January and February. But who knows if Ukrainians are going to listen for Western countries. Maybe they won't. I believe they will. The only thing that can explain to me the possible offensive operation in Kuzyomovka is that Ukrainians can do some kind of exchange with Bakhmut. So they will step back from Bakhmut, and just to suppress this noise of loss of losing of Bakhmut, they may cover this situation with counter-offensive operation in Kuzyomovka in direction of Svatova. Like we have 1 loss, but we have much more important victory in the vicinity of Svatov. Maybe they're planning to do something like this. Anyway, I believe that sooner or later we're going to see this. I believe that there are just 2 or 3 weeks left before the winter part of the special operation of 2023 is going to be finished, and then we're going to enter, let's say, the early spring part of special military operation that promised us to bring a lot of interesting updates, a lot of interesting movements, and so on. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in Ukraine. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon. Have a good day. Bye bye.